Hello and welcome to Sincerely Elvis Presley. I'm Sean. Whether you're new to the channel or a regular viewer, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. So, where am I going to go today? Well, I was thinking, before March last year, I had no Elvis vinyl whatsoever in my collection, other than vinyl that had come packaged in with books. So there was a 10-inch with the Lawrence and Prodigy of Sunset, 10-inch with Technicolor to black and white in Technicolor or whatever the book was called, and some 7 inches in some of the FTD books, but that was it. And then my wife and I had a day out in a little town in Lincolnshire called Horncastle that's well known for lots of antique shops. And there's a particular antique shop there that I'd seen Elvis vinyl in before and always had a sort of a bit of a flick through to see what they had. So this time was no different. I had a flick through and they only had one, a US press of Let's Be Friends for £5. And there was something about it, I just thought, I can't leave it there on its own. So I bought it. I had one vinyl album to my name. And then, not all that long afterwards, we were in a town called Kettering. And there was a house clearance shop selling all sorts of things. And there was a vinyl section. And in there were 3 of the Camden albums. And I managed to, I think I got all 3 for £10. And again, for the nostalgia sort of aspect of it, I thought, yep, I'll get these. And so it began. When I started the channel in April, not long after that, a little while after that, I did a video talking about how to collect Elvis records on a budget. And then I stated that what I'd like to do is replace all the records I had as a kid through to my early teens and try and get as near as possible to original pressings, or as close as I could get on a budget. And my budget really centered around £5 to a top end of £15. I didn't really want to give any more than that, and I've kind of done it. I've kind of got there. Now there were a few sort of rules that I set myself. Where possible, if the record came originally with a laminate cover, I wanted the laminate cover because I really like the laminate covers. And I knew from the off that I wasn't really going to get any original 50s albums, not for that kind of budget and not in good condition. So I had to get as close as I can, or I could. So also, my original plan was to only go as far as I went originally, which was, I think the last vinyl I remember buying was the This Is Elvis soundtrack, first time around. But I have gone considerably further than that, a lot further than that. But I thought it'd be fun to follow up that video where I talked about how you can get a decent Elvis collection on a fairly frugal budget. And I thought it'd be fun to show you where I've got to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all the original UK pressings, or as close to the originals that I've got. And I'm going to go right from the first album up until This Is Elvis, because that's as far as my original collection went. So that's going to, if I take into account reissues that happened along the way that I've also picked up, that's going to be somewhere in the region of 70 odd albums. Now, if I show an album for a minute, that's going to make a long episode. So I think at the moment, this is probably looking like a 3-parter at least. So I'm just going to go for the first 20 odd now, and walk you through what I've managed to pick up. And yeah, so let's start right at the beginning with the first album. There was no way I was ever going to be able to get close to an original pressing of the first album. And what I found was, with later pressings, they didn't look like the original album. They removed all the 1254 numbering, and a lot of repressings. This sleeve is quite plain. So this is kind of as close a representation I could get to the first album. And this, I believe, is a German repress on an orange label, so that puts us in the 70s. But I think, you know, for a reasonable representation of Elvis's debut album, I'm quite happy with that. I think that ticked the box that I was looking for. So there's the first album, Rock and Roll, as it was known in this country. Now, Rock and Roll number 2, again, unreachable, even in battered condition, unreachable within any kind of reasonable budget, and certainly within a budget that's aiming to go no more than about £15. So the version of Rock and Roll number 2 that I got is from, so this was repressed in 1962 with representations made to RCA from Albert Hand and the UK Fan Club, because the second album was out of print and they were kind of demanding that it was made available to them. So what I've got here is, let's have a look, a small silver spot pressing of Rock and Roll number 2 in mono, and this one's in really nice condition. I picked this up at a great price. What I have found is with the older LPs and the original sleeves, they're really difficult to get back in the outer sleeves, so I'm not even going to try on camera, but that's the mono press of Rock and Roll number 2. And what they did when they repressed it, they gave it the original Elvis's second album cover from the US, rather than Rock and Roll number 2 as it existed in the UK. I have got a Japanese repress of Rock and Roll number 2 on 10-inch, nice purple vinyl, but that's framed on my wall. And I've also got a reissue of Rock and Roll number 2 in the infamous reprocessed stereo. So this is an orange label, so this will be a 70s repress, but that's in really nice condition as well. In fact, I think when I originally bought when I said that I didn't have any vinyl before March last year, I had a few albums that I'd bought specifically to frame and put on the wall. That was the reason I bought them, and I think this was one of them. So actually I told a bit of a fib there. My memory was failing me. I did have a couple, but they weren't bought to own albums. They were bought as artwork, basically. So there we go, on to Loving You, and this is a 1957 original. So this is the only 50s original that I've got as an original press. And I believe this sleeve puts this, it's a 57, I think it's a 57 press of the record, and the sleeve was produced in January 1958. So again, another one that's difficult to get in its sleeve. Now, the next one, when HMV were losing their license to press Elvis records, they put out a 10-inch record called The Best of Elvis. Now this one was unobtainium. This was way out of my price range to get anything near an original. So what I've got here is a nice little French repress from the early 80s, but it's quite a faithful reproduction of that original 10-inch The Best of Elvis. So, you know, I'm quite happy to have that as my representation of it. The big difference being that the original had HMV banner in there, and this, they've gone with the RCA here. That's probably a rights issue thing when they issued this in France in the 80s. So then we move on to the Elvis Christmas album, and this one is a 64 repress, but close enough for what I wanted and within my budget. There are a few of these albums that shot the £15 budget by a little. I think this was one of them, because it's a 50s original, well, it's not 50s original, it's 60s, what am I talking about? But because of the condition and it's in etc, etc, I think this one pushed up to £25. This was one of, there are a few within the whole collection that went a bit higher. Next we have King Creole. Now this was an absolute beautiful condition version of King Creole that unfortunately ended up with a few creases. I don't know if you can see them there, because it wasn't packaged very well when it was sent to me, which was rather annoying. But this is, I believe, a 60s red spot, so that probably puts it maybe around 64, but with the nice original sleeve, so happy with that. Moving on, the first Golden Records. Now this is one of the slightly later versions, so this has just a flap, so you don't get the booklet that came with the very first pressings. This is on the red seal, so you just get this little flap here. And I've also got a slightly later repress, and this is on that version of the red seal. Probably not the original inner sleeve on that. Then we move on to the album that in the US was called For LP Fans Only, but here it was just called, I think it's just called Elvis. See it there. This is, again, pattern forming here with the 50s ones. I've gone for the sort of 60s pressings with the red spot, because they are easier to pick up in nice condition for the sort of money that I was willing to pay. But that's a nice little pressing of what's known as For LP Fans Only, but as I say in here, it's just called Elvis in the UK. Moving on, we have Date with Elvis, and this is, guess what, it's a 60s red spot. And that's what I found, you know, I found that to get something, because, you know, look, the sleeve's in lovely condition, and to get things that were still in nice condition, it was easier to go with the 60s pressings, which are close enough for me. Gold Records Volume 2. 50 Million Elvis Fans Can't Be Wrong, as it was known in the US. Guess what? Red spot. For exactly the same reasons. At least when we move on to the 60s, the red spots will probably be legit originals, but right, Elvis is back. For the sort of money I wanted to pay, not possible to get original 1960 press with the gatefold sleeve. You know, you could, but they're going to be battered, they're going to be creased, they're going to be torn. So I went with this really nice 70s repress, been in a beautiful laminated on both sides sleeve, and that's on your orange label. So happy with that. Don't think that's the original inner sleeve though. Moving on, staying in 60, we've got GI Blues. This one was one of the cheapest I got. This was £5. And in, you know, the sleeves are really nice and clean. And I think, what have we got? Guess what? Red spot. Hence the reason that the sleeve's really nice and clean, perhaps for the money I paid for it, £5. Next album up is Hand in Mine. I think this was £5 as well. This was sold as a, what did they call it? A copy to own rather than a collector copy or something like that. Because it is a bit, it's got a few creases, but it isn't too bad. Guess what? Red spot, and that isn't the original inner sleeve. In fact, one of these days, when I'm at these antique shops and record fairs. I might look for some really cheap 60s RCA albums by any artist and see if I can get some of the original inner sleeves to replace those. Next we have Something for Everybody, and again you've got quite a bit of this one's got quite a bit of yellowing on, but I certainly haven't seen many copies within the budget that I set that weren't like that. I guess you've got to pay the big money for one that's nice and crisp and white, but because we've got large silver spot there, that tells us we've got an original. So there we go. Next up, Blue Hawaii, and this was a cheap one as well. I think this was about £8. It's not in pristine condition, but I don't think until you get into some of the later ones, as I say, for the budget that I've set myself, I don't think you're going to get pristine condition. You're going to be lucky. So that's your big silver spot, large silver spot. So that's an original, but definitely not the original inner sleeve there. So we now have Potluck with Elvis. This one, slight bit of laminate lift there. That's something that I tried to find ones that didn't have much laminate lift, because that can be quite common amongst the older titles. So there we go, and we have large silver spot. Again, not the original inner sleeve. Unfortunately, that seems to be quite common with this kind of price range. Next up, Girls, Girls, Girls. Now I went through a couple of, I've got some really cheap versions of this, but they weren't in great shape at all. So I hung out, and again, we're not talking mint, of course we're not, but this one isn't in too bad condition at all. And this is small silver spot. So if I remember rightly, that probably puts that as an original. And that's hard to get in. Sticking with the soundtrack theme, it happened at the World's Fair. Now this is a double laminate, laminated on both sides. Nice shape this, a little ding to the top there, but other than that, nice condition. And that's our small silver spot. So that should be an original. Obviously I'm aware when I say original, there are shades of original, because there are pressings and repressings within that original space of time and going forwards. So, when I say original, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a first press, but it's pretty close. It's closer than getting a red spot for a 50s album, let's put it that way. Fun in Acapulco. This is a double laminate both sides as well. And this, oh that's right, I think the inner sleeve was quite tatty, so I put it in a separate one, but if you can see through the glare there, that is a small silver spot as well. So that should be as close as makes no difference to an original press of Fun in Acapulco. And then I think the last one I'm going to look at, just a nice little punctuation for the early releases, is Elvis Gold Records Volume 3. And that is your red spot, which I would have thought, if I remember rightly, 1964, that's when red spot came in. So this is probably close to an original press as well. So there we go. That takes us from 1956 to 1964, and that's about the shape of what I've got for that era. So next time I'll move on and we'll take a look at what else I've got, probably similar sort of amount, and see what you think. So I hope that was of interest, because I thought it was worth following up on what I'd set out to do, set my stall out, if you like, 7 months or so ago, when I said this is what I'm aiming to do. So let me know in the comments what you think. Have I done all right? Have I got some that you thought could have done better than that for the money? Or do you think I did okay? So until next time, when we move on, please do like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the great stuff that helps grow the channel. And until next time, have a great week. Take care. Ta-da.
We'll meet you again. May God bless you. Adios.